And now to stories outside our shores. Stocks in the U.S. and around the world are buckling under pressure as President Donald Trump's tariffs rattle investors globally. But while stock prices hit rock bottom, bond prices jumped as investors sought safe havens from the collapse in stocks, and analysts raised the odds of the U.S. and other countries sliding into recession. The bond rally comes even as the newly imposed tariffs threaten to bring renewed upward pressure on inflation. As stocks fell and economists ratcheted down their forecast for economic growth, bond futures trades raised the odds of the Federal Reserve stepping up the scope of interest rate cuts this year. The European Union, Canada, and other countries have already announced counter-tariffs in response to Trump's move. This escalation of protectionist trade policies has sparked concerns about the potential for a global trade war, which could have devastating effects on the global economy. Two African countries, Madagascar and Lesotho, are among the top 5 countries facing the highest tariffs. Let's bring in Professor Anthony Kila, Professor of Strategy and Development and Center Director of Commonwealth Institute of Advanced and Professional Studies. He joins me from Lagos. Thank you so much for coming on the program.
Yeah, good evening.
You saw this coming, didn't you?
Well, yes. I mean, we some of us saw it coming, and it was said. And I think, at some point, President Trump himself understands what might happen. That it is likely that these tariffs might do 2 things. Number one is lead to a recession, or at least some kind of contraction of the economy, and retaliation from other countries affected. There's something generally, some of us are, avoid against introduction of tariffs generally, but there's something that compounds the situation here, and that is the uncertainty that Donald Trump himself presents as a person, and that is reflected in his economy. If the markets were very clear of what the tariffs were going to be exactly, and how they're introduced and implemented, there'll be stability. But because the man and his administration are rather unstable, those are one of the things that are affecting the market overall. Then, the whole story of the tariff is yet to be looked at. Is it going to benefit Americans? Trump and his people think so. Economists do not agree. It's a sad thing that it affects people's lives, but otherwise, it will be a fascinating story to watch.
Right. And we're seeing that the U.S. is actually targeting countries where it has trade deficits. In Africa here, South Africa, the U.S.-South Africa trade deficit is upwards, billions of dollars, and Trump doesn't clearly like that. What should African countries begin to do now to prepare themselves for what obviously is the inevitable impact of these tariffs?
Well, I think there are 2 things. Number one is African countries should look at themselves and see that while most of them belong to the same kind of basket, they're not exactly the same in the same situation. The country that was most hit is Lesotho, that was doing a lot of trade with America. South Africa was doing a lot of trade with America. This is the kind of thing that lets you know that some countries like Nigeria, Ghana, were actually not doing a lot of trade with America. So I guess, and America is a very interesting market. We're not trading there. You're probably not trading in most places. I think the first thing African leaders and countries need to look at is to understand that, many of them were just talking. They were not doing when it comes down to figures. There is a minimum 10% tariff on any country in the world. That is what Donald Trump has introduced. And Nigeria, for example, is on 12. Which shows you that, almost nothing was happening there, not enough, definitely. And the trade that was happening for Nigeria, let's be a bit parochial here, and the trade that was happening for Nigeria are mainly natural resources, crude oil, gas, and things like that. So African countries need to go and tighten their belt and see how they can produce more. In reality, not many of them will be directly affected by this. Maybe South Africa, maybe Lesotho, maybe a few other countries. So what this is telling us is that we have a lot to do in terms of reliance, let alone exports.
Let's look at the impact this will have on AGOA, which is the African Growth and Opportunity Act that provides eligible
Yes.
sub-Saharan African countries with duty-free access to the United States market for over 1,800 products. Analysts are saying that
Well, that's
AGOA
very
is going down the
interesting.
drain.
Yeah, it is going down the drain, and you're very right to pick it up. And this is where ideology and kind of mindset came up. AGOA was introduced by Clinton, when he was there. The idea was to let African countries grow, since the mantle then was trade, not aid. So let us allow them to get their foot in the American market, and then without tariffs. Um, Mr. Donald Trump does not like all those things. And some of us warned about this, that he doesn't believe in those kind of let's boost trade, let's facilitate poor countries. No. His persona and his administration is very transactional to say what's in it for us. So AGOA is going down the drain. But again, something must have said about Trump, because he's very unpredictable. You cannot write anything about him in stone. He's a very personable, very transactional, very negotiation person. If African leaders can get together, the most articulate of them, make a case, and take something to the table for him, there could be change. Mr. Trump is somebody that changes his idea very easily. What we need are people that can understand him and know how to negotiate. And I think to that point, the silence of Nigerian government since this tariff has been come out is quite an annoying silence.
It is indeed. So going forward now, we are all expecting some kind of impact on African economies going forward. What should the ordinary people, especially, traders, people who are involved with AGOA, what should they do? How should they prepare for the fallout?
Well, I think the quote unquote the big countries that are affected by this are going to face some kind of recession or contraction of the economy, because places like in Lesotho that were producing things like textile, and the American trade was close to 10% of their own GDP. They're in big trouble. For countries like Nigeria, I think those who are planning to export to America need to focus on items and services that has inelastic demand, i.e., that Americans cannot do without. It's either they're selling to Americans or they're selling to people who have taste for African products. What they just need to do, if they can, would be to transfer the cost of the tariff to the importers and therefore to the consumers. So in a way, it's not going to affect very much. What it can do is to perhaps cut a bit of their profit if they're willing to share the tariff. Otherwise, they just transfer it.
Right.
It is bad in principle, but for countries that do little trading, and most of them done by small, medium enterprises, they can manage it. That's not a problem. Who's going to suffer the problem in a place like Nigeria will be big exporters,
Right.
like a new refinery, for example, and those who do gas and that kind of thing. That's where the problem lies.
All right. Thank you so much. We're going to have to leave it there. Professor Anthony Kila, thank you so much for coming on the show tonight.